I want to begin this morning by talking about the fact that we will be instituting a very critical step, and that'll start right now. Today, the United States is designating North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism. This designation will impose further sanctions and penalties on North Korea and related persons and supports our maximum pressure campaign to isolate the murderous regime.
Meanwhile, Washington imposed additional sanctions on North Korea and Chinese firms suspected of having business ties with Pyongyang. These companies are believed to have shipped hundreds of millions of dollars worth of goods to the north. Ji Myung-gil fills us in on the latest U.S. measures to rein in the out-of-control regime.
The U.S. Treasury Department says it is blacklisting one Chinese national, 13 entities, and 20 shipping vessels for helping Pyongyang bypass UN sanctions. The sanctions will target transportation networks as well as individuals and trading firms with business ties to North Korea to cut off funding for its nuclear and missile developments. But one North Korean expert conveyed his pessimism.
The North Korean regime's lifeline is oil. If China is reluctant to cut off oil supplies through a pipeline, then extra measures taken by the U.S. can be significant but not fully effective. Traders in China's northeast region bordering North Korea should also abide by the sanctions for them to be effective.
The U.S. has already introduced a slew of new punitive measures against Pyongyang this year, which also target Chinese and Russian entities. According to the Treasury Department, since 2013, 4 Chinese trading companies exported over $670 million of goods to North Korea, while importing $100 million worth of goods.
Designating Chinese companies on the sanction list is a symbolic move, as the U.S. plans to indirectly pressure North Korea through pressuring a third party, China, on par with ongoing sanctions.
However, China's foreign ministry said on Wednesday that Beijing is against the unilateral sanctions slapped by Washington. The latest move comes just one day after President Trump announced the U.S. was reinstating North Korea on its list of state sponsors of terrorism. The regime is now one of 4 countries in the world to be designated as such, joining the ranks of Iran, Sudan, and Syria. The reclusive regime had been removed from that list in 2008 under the previous George W. Bush administration as part of a nuclear deal which ultimately collapsed.
On top of the new sanctions from the U.S., China's state-run air carrier, Air China, has suspended flights between Beijing and North Korea. The move is expected to deepen the North's isolation. Park Ji-won has more.
Air China has pulled the plug on flights between Beijing and Pyongyang, citing unsatisfactory business operations. The decision came after the U.S. government put North Korea back on its list of state sponsors of terrorism. AP reports, quoting airline officials, that Air China's flight to and from Pyongyang on Monday was its last flight to the north, and they have no idea when or if the flights will resume. A Chinese TV channel also reports that Air China has withdrawn its personnel from its offices in Pyongyang. Air China opened a route between Beijing and Pyongyang in 2008, but the flights were often chronically underbooked, so cancellations were a frequent occurrence. With the move, North Korea's Air Korea becomes the only airline that regularly connects the 2 countries. The North Korean airline has regular flights to 4 cities in China, including Beijing and Vladivostok in Russia. Train and other land routes between China and North Korea will stay intact.
New this morning, holding on line 1, a call with major global implications.
The Treasury Department will punish North Korea further now that President Trump has listed North Korea back as a state sponsor of terror. A new set of sanctions is expected to be announced soon. No telling exactly what they'll be.
Yeah, overnight, North Korea state media blasted away at President Trump. CNN's Barbara Starr at the Pentagon. Barbara, what are the North Koreans saying now?
Well, there was first a visual signal, John and Poppy, the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un touring a vehicle factory, perhaps trying to send the signal to the world that there may be sanctions, but that he still has industrial capacity in his country, if you will. And of course, the sanctions are going to be aimed at trying to curb outside countries, outside people, helping him with any financing, any capability for that sort of thing. The North Korean state media had very blunt words for the United States and the President of the United States. And let me just read to you the statement that they issued, saying, quote, "The hideous crises committed by the lunatic president of the U.S. are a blatant challenge to the dignity of the supreme leadership of the DPRK, a wanton violation of its sovereignty, and a vicious insult to the genuine life of the Korean people." The kind of language we have come to expect from Kim Jong-un's regime. As long as it's just nasty language, perhaps not all that troubling. But with the new sanctions, the question will be, will Kim respond with new provocations? That's what everyone will be watching for. Will there be additional weapons testing? Will there be additional test launches of their ballistic missiles?
North Korea, Barbara Starr, has been off this list for 9 years since President Bush took it off the state sponsor of terror list for 2008. Can we talk about effectively what will actually change and how much sort of power there is to move North Korea's hand by putting them back on this list?
Well, I think that's really the critical question. You know, yesterday, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, when he came on the White House podium, was pretty candid that the sanctions against North Korea already are very significant, and that this might not move that ball forward so much. What is left to sanction? You could sanction additional persons that do business with North Korea. You could sanction Chinese banks. That is North Korea's gateway into international financial markets and transactions. The president mentioning the death of the American student Otto Warmbier, the assassination of Kim Jong-un's half-brother as reasons for putting them back on the list of state sponsors of terrorism or contributing factors. But how much you can really achieve still remains to be seen, because the real question is any of this really going to work as deterrence? Will additional sanctions provide additional deterrence to Kim Jong-un on his weapons program? How will he react to all of it? He's already got fuel shortages in his country. He already has, tough problems with food, other industrial supplies. So will these sanctions actually somehow have enough impact that suddenly things would become so dire, more dire in North Korea, that he would react by saying, I'll give up my weapons programs? Right. I think there's a lot of doubt on that.
It would take a lot, if history proves to repeat itself, for him to do anything of the sort. Barbara Starr at the Pentagon, thank you.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson answers reporter questions about North Korea at the daily White House press briefing.
If China does not agree to cut off oil shipments to North Korea, how can you possibly get enough pressure on them to come?
Well, their fuel supplies are already quite constrained, and as I said, we have evidence that there are fuel shortages in North Korea. Obviously, the civilians are by and large the ones that can't get fuel, so we see long lines of vehicles at petrol stations. We see certain petrol stations that appear to be out of fuel because they're closed when normally they'd be open. So there are indications that fuel supplies are already quite tight. As you know, they only refined a small amount of their fuel needs internally. They only have one refinery that operates, and it operates at a low capacity. So they were heavily dependent on imports of finished fuel products, which have been constrained significantly with the UN sanctions.
But is the Chinese action essential? In other words, do you need China to cut off those oil shipments?
I don't know that the cutting off of oil is the magic wand or the silver bullet that is going to bring them to the table. What I would say is that the North Koreans have demonstrated in the past they have an enormous capacity to withstand a lot. They'll make their people pay, but they have an enormous capacity to withstand a lot. So I don't want to suggest that we think that one action is all it would take to get them to the table.
Margaret. Thank you. Margaret Tala with Bloomberg. Thanks for welcome in our briefing room many times. I want to pick up on Olivia's question about the assassinations. How determinative was that in the specific evidence they used to make this determination? And I also want to ask you, I think you and Ambassador Haley both spent some time with the president, and that's unusual. I know she was in town today. Can you tell us a little bit about that meeting and any substance that came up with?
Well, on the assassinations, the assassination in Malaysia was a significant event that caused us to really begin to look carefully at what else they might have been doing. As you know, that assassination involved the use of a chemical agent, a very dangerous agent, in a public place, and so that really got our attention. One of the things that we wanted to ensure is that we had a sufficient certainty around their role in that particular assassination, and so we've been working with Malaysian authorities as well and been in conversation with them. Wanted to let them have their own process obviously play out as well. With respect to Ambassador Haley and I, we were just both in the cabinet meeting today.
Was the threats, I know without getting too much into it, that there had been a suggestion from the North Korean media about some violence directed toward the U.S. president. Was that a determinative factor at all in the decision to make a designation?
No.
Mr. Secretary, Peter Baker, New York Times. Thank you for coming. You talked about assassination on foreign soil using a chemical agent. Russia has been accused of assassination on foreign soil, including using polonium in London. Should they be considered for the same sort of designation?
I think we have to consider every country that would take a substance like that and use it illegally.
Is there a process like that going on right now with Russia?
I don't want to comment on that.
Trey?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Trey Yinks with One American News. Two quick questions for you. How do you balance the impact of sanctions? You talked about the people of North Korea paying the price. Is this something you're considering when you talk about more sanctions towards the regime of Kim Jong-un?
Well, it's always a difficult choice you make when you impose sanctions in terms of who's really going to bear the burden here. The truth of the matter is the people of North Korea already live under enormously difficult conditions. And I think what we're focused on is a mission that's going to change North Korea's trajectory, change their path. That's the best way we can help the North Korean people in the future, is to have Kim Jong-un reverse his nuclear weapons program, allow us and the rest of the world to then engage with them in economic activity that will ultimately provide a better life for his people.
And my follow-up question, do you believe that the United States is running out of diplomatic options to respond to the nuclear threat of North Korea?
No, I do not.
We've got time for one last question. John Gizzy in the back.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. You talked about the limited intelligence on North Korea and on the regime. Is there any evidence of any dissent within Pyongyang at all, or possibly reaction against the current government by other members of the Kim family even, or other opponents to him?
Well, I want to be a little careful about how I answer that. What I would comment on is you're well aware of a number of executions that have occurred within his inner circle and within many of the military people that are close to him. So I'll leave it to your own interpretation.